right, welcome everybody to the ANA eLearning Academy. Today we are going to have Lawrence Korchnak teach us about the story of siege money. You will be muted for this, so if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat or in the Q&A, and I will answer, or I'll read them to him at the end. You can go ahead and get started now.
Okay, thanks. First of all, anyone who's watching, thanks for watching. It's a passion of mine. I've collected these for over 50 years, and I've been involved recently with completing a catalog on siege money, which will be published by CNG soon, I hope. It's been delayed by COVID. Now, after that shameless bit of self-promotion, I'll get into the presentation. Siege money is really a fascinating collecting specialty. And now, while siege issues are documented all the way throughout history, most prolific production of the siege money occurred during the European wars of the 16th and 17th centuries. These wars really provided the opportunity for developing nations to not only come out and set up their boundaries, but also to test the latest in military tactics and weaponry. The bow and arrow yielded to artillery and refined explosives, for example, and tactics ranged from blowing up dikes and tunneling beneath cities, starving the enemy, and deploying complex military tactics on land and sea. But at any rate, during these particular types of conflicts, and I have here a medal from the siege commemorating the siege of Leiden on 3 October 1574. Cities were surrounded by hostile forces, and they were cut off essentially from the outside world. You can see the city in the background, as well as the armies ready setting forth to besiege the city of Leiden on this one. Historical accounts of those battles really reflect some of the greatest things that have come out of people in terms of bravery, as well as some of the basest and cruelest things that have happened. For example, during the siege of Vienna, they would take that would be 1529. They would take behead their captives and put them on poles and try to demoralize those who are defending the city. While in one of the Dutch siege cities, the mayor of the city, when things were looking bad, stood before his people, held up his arm, and said, "If you're starving and hungry, cut my arm off, eat that. We have to hold out against the Spanish." So these type of things occurred. And if you read anything in Motley's Rise of the Dutch Republic, you'll see a lot of that stuff, as well as other historical accounts. So this particular medal of Leiden, it's a commemorative medal, shows the actual siege here. And I'm moving now to an allegorical representation to the Archangel Michael leading the forces to drive the Ottomans, if you look down below, to drive the Muslims out of Jerusalem back in back in the 700 AD. Now, laying siege to the city is often complicated, as I can show in this medal. This is the siege of Groningen, 1672, Groningen, Coevorden. And you see where the city, again, the walls of the city and here, and then the troops lined up, pretty typical for a siege. And this is the siege from the other view, from the other side of the city. And that's how it was. Soldiers battled fiercely. They battled for their lives and are honored, and they were paid accordingly. Now, they didn't have national armies at this time. The armies were essentially mercenaries, and people who fought in these sieges were the ones who could get money and would do whatever they wanted to do for payment. You'd have the Landsknechts. You could have Germans on the sides of the Scots, on the sides of an English, all fighting side by side, whoever paid them. And so those people were paid accordingly, and they were paid with every coin of the realm that existed. And the people in the city, of course, defended with their coin of the realm. But those who were besieging had their own ways of payment. And during longer sieges, this money ran out. And since they were mercenaries, they had to get paid. So, in getting paid, that's what they did. Now, looking these things up, when I started collecting these way back into the early 70s, there was nothing in English. We have catalogs are in French, German, Latin. You had Maillet, a Belgian artillery officer, wrote a book. You had Van Loon in Dutch, Duby in French, and Van Loon, of course, in Dutch, and then a few other books. And there are specialized things, but there wasn't a whole lot. So I had to do a lot of research on, and that's what got me involved in this because I love history. Now, to begin with, siege money is necessity money, but not all necessity money is siege money. Provisional coinage and emergency money were issued during transitions of sovereignty and in any time there's a monetary shortage. This is a 4A Athenian tetradrachm. A 4A tetradrachm, they were in the process of siege around 406 to 404 BC, and they debased the coins and they silver coated them. Emergency, but not siege. Even though it was during a siege, it wasn't used to pay the troops. Other coins, like this one here, and necessity money, were struck by rulers in exile. This is an extremely rare 80 reis from Terceira Islands in 1824, 26, excuse me. And the 26 was before the actual sieges that they did in Terceira in 1829. This is one of only 4 known. But as you can see, this was Maria in exile. This was her coin. LXXX, Reese, and she was just a young girl at that time, and it was under regency in Portugal at the time. But again, it is not a siege coin; it's an emergency coin struck in exile. Also, during times of trouble, here is a gold ducat, Netherlands gold ducat, counterstamped with the Lion of Holland. When they needed to pay because of emergency conditions and the government needed more money, what sometimes they did was revalued. This is an example of a revalued ducat, and this ducat was revalued 1/8, 12.5%, so that now it was worth more and they could use it to pay some of the war debts that they needed to do at that time. Now, the proper term for siege money is derived from the Latin word for siege, which obsidere, meaning to besiege, and hence the name obsidinal or siege money. The term shows up on a lot of siege money, and sometimes if it's not in the full thing, here's a Newark 6pence. It's known as OBS. That's OBS for obsessa, for besieged. It also can show in Latin here, as you can see on the side, assedio, which is Latin, which is again a Latin type form of the word to besiege. So bottom line is necessity conditions produced emergency money, but only sieges produced obsidinal money or siege money. It was created to pay troops who were besieging or defending a city or a town when all the coin of the realm or whatever they brought with them ran out. Again, since all communications and contact with the outside world were cut off during a siege, entire cities were forced to rechannel their financial resources to pay armies. Now, here is a map of the siege of Mainz or Mayence. Of course, it depended on who took it over at one point. It was Mainz if it was controlled by Germany, and Mayence if it was controlled by France. But this is a siege of Mayence in 1793, and you can see how they surrounded the city. The river ran through, the city is fortified, and then the troops would line up and they were ready to take the city. This was Prussian troops essentially during this particular siege. We'll talk about this one later because the fact that the river ran through the town made for some very interesting stories of how they fought and how they defended the city. At any rate, the soldiers were paid. They were hired guns, as I remember, as I said earlier, hired guns, mercenaries. It's not hard to conceive of. Even in the U.S. Revolution, the British paid Hessians to come over here and fight for them. It was not uncommon. Even though Britain had an army, it's still remnants of sending mercenaries to do their dirty work someplace. And that's essentially what it was. In fact, history documents these people who are hired guns actually turning over to the other side. In 1453, during the siege of Constantinople, many of the soldier defenders, because Constantine XI, the Byzantine Empire had essentially been reduced to the city of Constantinople, so there was little money. And although there were some coins, I believe siege coins struck there to pay the troops sometimes left and went to fight for Mehmed II, who eventually took over this Constantinople. So when defending or besieging armies ran out of money, the local money, what they brought with them, what they normally used, the issuing authority, whoever it was, the besiegers or the city or whatever, resorted to alternative methods of payment. Okay, so what did they do? Under emergency conditions, faced with the threat of losing an army, sovereign had no choice but to pay them. If they didn't, in less than an hour, they can take new money and create it. They can take pieces of money. They grab it, cut it, they strike it, and circulate it. Inside of an hour, you can have money as long as you had something to put to mint the coin on. This is a Devonshire piece, 7.5 stivers, 1672. Similarly, later on in Middleburg, 1572, as you can see that. They cut off a piece of metal, they struck what they needed, the coat of arms and a few things, and denomination. In this case, there's no denomination on it, but it was done by weight. Now, what good was this? Well, for one thing, this money had value intrinsically or symbolically. What you've seen are a couple intrinsically valuable coins. What I mean by that is they were struck in silver. So if they were a $1 sized coin or 40 stivers or whatever, or a fraction of that, they had that amount that would be from the coins that were minted at the time, okay? And that would be good because that's what you would have. Now, if you won the siege, you usually took these and you turned them in for real money, the coin of the realm. If you lost the siege, basically a lot of the gold and silver and any coin with intrinsic value were melted down. And those things really were not kept because, well, the issuing authority didn't exist anymore. But there are several exceptions to the practice of redeeming the emergency coins after the siege. Some of them were mounted. You can mount them legitimately, or like this, excuse me, the shilling, Newark shilling just had a hole drilled in it, and they wore those things or carried them around. This is a Leiden, 28 stiver, siege of 1634, and you can see how they just kind of engraved the edge, put someone's initials on both sides at 9 o'clock and at 3 o'clock, and that was something that was kept as a souvenir. Also, you would see things like this. This is a Tournai 20 sol piece where they engraved the back, showing that the citadel was besieged in September 3 of September 1709. And those type of things happened. And still, some were struck after the siege. The siege of Groningen, the medal I showed you earlier, this is a coin that was struck. They had a series of 6 1/4, 12 1/2, 25, and 50 stiver coins. You see these fairly often in terms of the siege coin. This is the 12 1/2 stiver from my collection. In fact, all the pieces you see in this particular presentation are from my personal collection. And when I do talks like this, I like going back into the vault, looking at them and see them again because I miss my friends every once in a while. This is a 12 1/2 stiver. There's a 25 stiver piece. They had 50 stivers, and you will also note, and I didn't copy them here because of time, on the back of the Groningen pieces, virtually all of the denominations were engraved somewhat because they were issued after the siege in those denominations to the people who fought. So, siege money, what do they look like? The reason why I did this is because I want to introduce people to sieges. What do they look like? You've seen some of them are round. This is an Alkmaar, 36 stivers from 1573. This is done in lead. It's a really interesting piece. You could tell that the lettering was done crudely, and it has the tower, which is a symbol of the city of Alkmaar, which incidentally is the city where the mayor raised his arm and says, "You can cut off my arm and eat it if you need to be saved from the Spanish Unfortunately, and I'll be a spoiler on this one. They did open up the dikes, and the beggars of the sea came in and helped fight off the Spanish, and they relieved the town. Another round one would be this Mantua scudo. And this scudo is in copper, and normally scudos are in silver. Or this is, no, I take it back. That's my coloration. I have other ones. I have to remember which ones are on here. This is a silver Mantua scudo showing the siege. If you see under the MANOBSES, remember we said obsedere, obsessa, that's the Latin word, Mantua obsessa, Mantua besieged. They're triangular ones. This is Julich, 1543. Again, a crude piece of silver, cut in a triangular piece to a weight, bam, there it is. Julich, 1/2 taller, that simple. A lot of them were quadrangular or square. This is Frankenthal, 4 thalers. I always call it my Mercedes-Benz coin because it's reminiscent of a Mercedes, although that isn't the Mercedes symbol. Just the tetrahedron there, it's a rather interesting coin. A whole series of those were made. I'm going to do another talk in February on the Dutch sieges of the 16th and 17th century. And I'll talk more about Frankenthal and some of the stories behind the sieges that I'm showing you now. There's also Brussels in 1579, St. Michael slaying the devil. There's also a version, as I put my cursor there, this 18 stiver, there's a version with a helmeted and not helmeted version. And so even there are varieties. If you really want to get into it, you can collect varieties of siege coin, but technically everyone almost is different because of the emergency conditions for most of them. Here's a, move it there. There's a square one, siege of Aria or R, 19 grams, 1646. Interesting siege in 1641. They were struck by not only Louis the 13th, but also by the other defenders, Philip, because they were besieged twice in the same year. That'll come down the road. Here are octagonal pieces. This is a Landau piece, the Landau 1713. Again, you remember these things were done in emergency conditions. They cut out a amount of silver, they cut the edges, weighed it off. Sometimes I know that these marks, these regal marks on the thing were there probably for saying who issued it, but the coat of arms generally said that. These things I think were put on there because that prevented people from clipping them and taking off the silver. This one's a 2-fluorinate, Frank. There's another quadrangular one. I just got this recently for my collection. I up-traded. This is a Pontefract shilling, 1643, octagonal. Carolus Rex, the city of the castle of Pontefract. It's really a neat coin. A lot of the coins in the British siege pieces are really, really amazing. And I'm still looking for a couple of the rare ones, Scarborough and Carlisle. Here's one that's a lozenge shape. This is a Newark half crown. That's more lozenge shape. It looks probably a little squarer than it should because I enlarged it for the slide. And irregular, another lozenge shape. This is the other side of that Tournai piece that was engraved. Let me show you, that's a lozenge shaped piece, 20 sol, Tournai, and that's the head of the guy who was defending the city. Yeah. Now you have other irregular ones. As I said, some of the British ones are really fascinating. This is Inchiquin, an Inchiquin crown, 19 pettyweight 8 grams, excuse me. It's a really fascinating coin. And of course, another Landau, this is Landau siege of 1702. They took the plates of the governors and the aristocracy, they cut them up into a size, weighed them, put their symbol, see symbol, told you what it is. what it is, Landau, 1702, and they put the little fleur-de-lis all the way along, and that prevented anyone from clipping them and taking the silver for later. So this gives you an idea of what they look like. Now, what is it made of? Okay. Some of them, they took circulating coins. This is a very small piece, which I enlarged. I apologize. The detail isn't that great, probably, but this is a Magdeburg 1629 groschen. The host coin, much of the host coin has been obliterated by the rose counterstamp, and that's what they did during that siege, at the beginning of the siege. To denote that, more than likely revalued the coinage at the time. And these are ones you will see fairly often of the series: a half, a one, a four, an 8, 16, and 40 Stiver piece of Devonshire 1578. Smaller, but still clearly distinguishable counterstamp. Those are the counterstamp ones. Some of them were cast. They made them, just not made them, but they cast them. And this is the Cattaro, a Cattaro piece. This Cattaro piece is from the Fruit collection. I bought that probably in the 80s somewhere in a New York sale, and it's a 5 franc from the Siege of Cattaro, 1813. You can see the depressions that come from when the cooling of the metal when it is cast. Most were stamped or struck like these pieces here. This is one of my favorites. It's just a classic piece from Campins at 1578, showing 42 Stiver and all the things that you would see. It tells you there's an inscription, the coat of arms of the city, the name of where it is, and the date. Likewise, Amsterdam, they're very much the same. Very emergency. That's a 40 Stiver piece in 1575, I believe that is 1575, and the marks that you see, the coat of arms of Amsterdam, and several marks. There's a whole series. All the coins from Amsterdam and Haarlem not only had the coat of arms, the date, and the denomination, but they also had different privy marks up in the corner. And there's probably, it depends on the issue and the year and the denomination. There probably were maybe anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 of those. And then you see siege pieces like this, things struck during the Britain's Great Rebellion. That's a Ormond half crown, and this is an Inchiquin half crown, different denomination, but just like Inchiquin, and that was a large chunk of metal, which they stamped the weight to say that's what the coin was. And then again, Cork, 1647. Yeah. Now, Napoleonic Wars gave us more examples. Here's an impressive 18 francs, 40 centime from Zara, or did I already go past it? Yes, I did. There we go. I reversed my slides here, but let me show you this large Zara piece. It's just a huge piece, and it's 4 ounces of silver. So you get some idea. It's about the size of a hockey puck, round, but not as thick. And then, of course, a 10 franc from Cattaro. I showed the 5 earlier. And those Napoleonic Wars did produce a lot of siege coins, Anvers, and a number of other things. There's a whole raft of things that came out during that time, the Mayans and things like that. Sacred vessels of the church were torn off oftentimes when they ran out of the, well, maybe not when they ran out of, if I will say this honestly, during the sieges, if it was in the Dutch sieges, at that particular point, there was much animus towards the Catholic Church. So before they took the aristocrats' silver, they went into the churches, stripped them of their silverware and goldware, the chalices, the candlesticks, the monstrances, anything that was decorated in that would take the metal. This is from the Siege of Vienna, 1529, and this was stripped from the churches in Vienna to do that. One of my favorite is this, and I know it looks hideous. This is a 1/8 stavrata, or 1/16 hyperpyron from the Siege of Constantinople in 1453. Now, how do you know that, you might ask? Because when I first read about this, When the hoard was discovered in the late 1980s, and Simon Bendel wrote a piece in the Numismatique Française about the hoard that was discovered. Those were the first ones. Of course, prior to that, Carson indicated in his work that he believed they were struck, but they didn't know of any. And they found these in the hoard of John VIII coins. But this is, and you can tell it is because you see that K, that's a K and an O. And that would stand for Constantine. It wouldn't have that if it were the previous emperor. Now on this coin, they would do it this way, as you see, up and down, or sometimes they would read it like a clock. This particular one is, I think, coin number 112 out of the hoard. There are 50 of these known. And this is the side, which is, this is the portrait of Constantine the 11th. And this is Christ the Pantocrator. Is Christ's head with his halo. And you might say, why are they so crude? Well, at this, as I said earlier, in 1453, Constantine didn't have much money, and those people who could be paid went to those who would pay them. And some of the people who could be paid were the gunsmiths, and who were the people who knew how to do metal. And the people who knew how to do metal would be the ones who could strike coins. So as it is reported, likely the people who had the skill enough to make a nice coin had already left, and these were made by less than skilled craftsmen. This is in Carson to say 1 day's wage for a soldier defending the city of Constantinople, or a gravedigger. 1 day's wages. Naturally, things always ran out too. So when the regular vessels ran out, they went to the plates of the aristocracy. Here's a Landau 1702 piece, and that's, you can see the end of the plate. This is somebody's silver service, and it was taken. And they had to do that in order to pay the garrison so that they wouldn't leave and they would stay to defend. And if you don't pay your people, what might happen is what happened to Rome in 1527. They didn't, in the process of going down to Naples and the armies going down, they didn't pay the troops. So when they got to Rome, they sacked it. And that was the classic sack of Rome. Even the generals couldn't control the troops because they needed paid. And they figured there's money there, they went after it. So they would do that. They would tear these things apart. Gold and silver were the preferred metals. Okay, this is a gold ducat from Middelburg in 1573. And also, and later on at the end, an een pond from the siege of Mafeking. It's a South African siege in Mafeking in 1902. Of course, there's silver, Xerxes, 48 stiver. Really, really neat. These coins just exude history, just by them being there. Anytime I look at my collection, I wonder who touched that. Who handled that coin? If I go back here, a gold een pond from South Africa. Winston Churchill was a journalist working for a London newspaper then. He could have had this. Who knows? There's no way of knowing. Or even if you go back to Constantine, who held that coin? Did Constantine give somebody that coin himself? You never know, but they're fascinating. You have copper. There's a Casals piece, copper. That would have been a scudo, and that particular piece is copper instead. Then there were, it's really neat, Casal, siege 1630. And then they were out of brass. In the siege of Mainz in 1793, this is a 5-sol piece. They took the old cannon that in weaponry that they had to make the coins to pay. They also have them in tin, the Schoenhoven, a 12-stiver piece from Schoenhoven. And they made them out of lead. That's another Xerxes, 15-stiver. And one of the really neater ones that came down out of a very old collection that I had bought is this Braunau, $1, 1743 in pewter. Virtual, pristine, magnificent coin. Sheets of these metals were stripped from monuments and churches and public buildings. They were cut into small pieces and they stamped an impression. Sometimes it looked like a coin, oftentimes it didn't. Sometimes only identifying initials or coat of arms was a familiar denomination, and this is exactly that. There's no denomination, but there's a coat of arms of Haarlem, 1572, and then one of those privy marks that I said, this is what a three-starred privy mark. They had a head of a bull, they had charcoal briquettes, they had a PC, the letters PC, number of things like that on that one. But that's what they did, All right. Now, the reverse are interesting too. This is a Julic, and you count each of those, that should be a 14. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 14 stiver piece of Julic. But a lot of times people will bring to me, because I've been collecting a lot and I know that, and they say, is this genuine? And I was going to one time do a presentation on the other side of the coin and talk about that, because it's the other side of the coin will show markings which are characteristic of a genuine siege piece, so that it's not struck on a modern thing or counterstamped on a modern thing or cast. As you can see, there are little markings throughout here. See those? And on that, and you can maybe see that a little bit here as well on this, the one I had earlier. This is the Middleburg piece, and you can see there's the haymarking will usually show up on here, because the haymarking came from the anvil upon which, or whatever piece of metal upon which they took that punch, or in this case, a batch of punches, and whacked them down while the metal was a little bit hot. And just to let you know, when the base metal ran out, they used leather to make money. And this is a leather ducat from Middleburg, 1573. That's really a fascinating piece. Now, I don't know how many of these exist. I'm not really even sure. They're probably 2 or 3, because when the sieges were this long and they resorted to things like metal and other baser things, in this case, something that was edible, people were starving and they ate the coins or ate the leather, and there wasn't anything to make the coins by. And as any of you recall, during the war, or Lichtenstein's ghetto, the 5 mark piece was struck in magnesium, and in the wintertime, those coins were less valuable as coins than they were to burn, because magnesium burned to provide warmth in the winter. So during the siege, you had things going on, and this particular kind of a coin never survived. Not many survived. That's one of the prizes of my collection, because I've not run across another leather piece. I also have a cambray piece, which was paper, and paper cambray pieces there still needs to be a lot of research done on those, but I think it's genuine. It came from a bunch of old collections. I'm fortunate, I live in the Pittsburgh area, and we had a number of predominantly notorious collectors here, even from George Rapp and the beginnings of the ANA, but to people like Howard Gibbs, who collected this type of stuff, and Doc Patton, who did some of these collections back in the 30s and 40s. And these all came out of collections sales from Shulman in the 20s and 30s. Paper money. One of the most interesting paper issues is those of Leyden. I showed a medal commemorating the siege of Leyden. This is a coin, a 1 quarter. I believe that this was, this is a $quarter. But what they did was they pasted prayer book pages and prayer book covers together, and they struck a coin like they would strike a coin if it was a metal planchet. You can see the ecclesiastical text in here. They went into the churches and took them. This is one that split apart. Here's a paper one, okay? That one would be like that, look, okay? And this is what it is in silver. Now I'm going to be a spoiler here, because just before I was ready to send in one of the final drafts of my book on siege money, I communicated with a professor in the Netherlands who did serious research on the siege of Leiden. And usually coins devolved into this. In other words, you started from precious metals and went down to the baser metals to paper. But in the case of Leiden, it was the opposite. William of Nassau authorized the minting of the paper coins during the siege. When the first siege was over, then they minted them in silver. So you have silver ones and you have paper ones. Silver ones are in clippy forms, and they're also round. I have a round one that's been cut out, but you have clippy ones, you have round ones, and then of course you have paper ones. And it was done the opposite. And they did that. And then the besiegers went off to take care of an army they thought was building up, wiped them out, came back to the city, and they did it again. So they struck coins. And now you had paper coins struck subsequent to that siege, very rare, 28 stiver paper from Leiden, and a 30 stiver. This is the front of a 30 stiver. Now they have the date, 1574, and on the other side of this would be the same. But they have inscriptions on here which indicate they could not have been struck during the siege because they list I was going to say Maurice of Nassau. No, William of Nassau. They listed him as the governor of the Netherlands, and he was not installed as a governor of the Netherlands until 1581. And there's still some research being done on that. But that's a spoiler. If you see these, more than likely you think these were done after they made the silver ones because they ran out of silver. No, these were done on the order of William of Nassau and William the Silent, if you will. And then these came later. And then these came later, and are not sure if it was late 1580s or the early 1600s. Other paper ones. The first paper currencies came out during the, technically they used that paper laden money, but that's not currency. That's just technically money made out of paper. And while they were using there, now Mainz was the first. You had Lyon, France, 1793. You had Vendée, for the soldiers, l'Armée catholique et royale. And you have the standard Mainz thing that you see. Now this 3 levers is interesting. Remember I showed you, let me see if I get back to the map. That's Mainz, okay? I put another piece of the map. It's all surrounded, and you see the river going through. This wasn't the first issue. I didn't cover them because they're rare pieces, and I just discovered some things in Europe, so I'm going to write about those before I bring them out. At any rate, they took the assignats of France, the revolution in assignats, and they hand wrote them on the back. They didn't make their own. They used the assignats, for example, a 10 livre, they increased in value to 25, and the 25 livre they increased, I believe, to 50, and they hand wrote them all on the back. And these are the ones that they actually minted to pay the troops. And there was several denominations, a 5, a 10 sol, and a 3 livre. And they were also in the printed and also signed notes. Now, why did I say that? The tactic is fascinating. The tactics, they were surrounded and they had people defending the city. And what the Prussians did was they would poison dead horses and float them down the river, because a siege wasn't just fighting all the time. It was starving people out. So when the people were starving, they floated dead horse carcasses down that laced with poison so the people would run down to get food to eat. Now, what did that do? First of all, it killed the occupants, but it forced them to take soldiers off the perimeter and guard the riverbank so that the people didn't go down to eat the poisoned soldiers. It was a really disastrous siege. The Prussians went back, everyone set things up. The French marched out singing La Marseillaise. The general went back to Germany, and he was soundly reprimanded because he didn't squash him like he should have. And it was a mess, but that's what happened here during the Siege of Mainz. Now, there's a diversity of time and need to create these things. See, on this one, you have a note. This is from Sudan. This is where the Siege of Khartoum. This is a 100 piastre produced in 1884 and 85. General Chinese Gordon, the Mahdi in Sudan, created a holy war, and he had to get his people to fight for him, and those are the Sudanese. And the Sudanese did not understand our language and didn't use our numbering system. So these things on here, they printed cardboard backed by Charles Gordon personally, his money account, and this little wavy thing with the dots symbolized 100. And so they knew they were going to get 100 piastres in payment. He signed a number of them personally, and after a while they stamped them. And they generally stamp on the back, get redeemed. Redeemed. You can see, redeemed here. Yep. Egypt Bank. Then we had to do that to pay. Some of the more fascinating is during the South African sieges, you had people that in Uppington, they had to pay the people. The Uppington Border Scouts, incidentally, Baden-Powell was the commander. We'll talk about Mafeking coins later, but Baden-Powell was a commander, and he modeled the International Boy Scouts from the Uppington Scouts, who were truthful and honest and loyal and very effective down there. But when they did things, they didn't have enough money to pay the troops, so they cut off old shirts, cut off pieces of shirt issued by paymaster in Uppington, and how much money, and this would be, And when they ran out of shirts, they used canvas from canvas bags. That's £2 note. Same thing. Fascinating. Necessity is the mother of invention. Then the Siege of Mafeking. This, I don't know if you can see it well. Maybe I should take another picture down the road, but this is a notepad. There's some little lines in there, but this is a notepad. They tore those out and they printed notes, 2 shilling note, to pay the soldiers in the Siege of Mafeking. They had 10 shilling notes. 10 shilling notes here. I put this one on. It's not a good one, but it's neat because this is where they misspelled the word commanding. Lord Colonel RSS Baden-Powell, commanding frontier forces, Siege of Mafeking. That's the Wolf. That's their famous gun. It was a French Revolution gun, 1792, that was in the front yard of a farm down a Boers farm down in South Africa, and they took it, reconditioned it, and used it to fight. Mafeking siege note. Interesting note. This, incidentally, was produced by, they didn't have printing presses. Some of these are really badly printed, but they didn't have printing presses because this particular note, they took croquet mallets, cut them in half, and then they carved. And these are printed like with the pressure, using the croquet mallet to print that. Neat. And in the Siege of Ookip, siege note, as you can see, it says there, Ookip siege note. 20 shillings, they mimeographed them. They just copied them off, made some notes, and that's what they used to pay. I have a couple of these. These are really fascinating notes. Also, you have notes in Palma Nova, the 1848, the year of all the revolutions. There was a siege in Palma Nova. That's a 50 centimos Palma. And handwritten notes. This is the siege of Coburg in 1807. They took pieces of cardboard and every note, two varieties, two types, three denominations of each type, but two types, and they just hand wrote them, and that's what they paid the troops from. So that to me is extremely fascinating. Again, siege money comes in many forms. It's money that was well. Before I go on, I try to wind things up here because I know there are some questions. I know I said something in Leiden about the paper coins and the silver coins, and more recent research. More recent research has revealed that Maillet, Browse Mansfield, etc., were all wrong when they said that the token from St. Catherine's in Leyden was a siege token. Those tokens were authorized by Charles V, and those were taken out of circulation prior to the siege of Leyden. And so there are really that's not the token. I thought that there would be siege tokens. There are no tokens. There are tokens used during sieges. They authorized, William the Silent authorized the reissuance of the St. Catherine's Hospital token because there was a shortage of money prior to the siege of Leyden. They weren't very rich, okay? So that was circulated during the siege, just like in the siege of Mainz, where the river where they poisoned the horses, because there was a river in two halves of the city, they had a ferry, and there are ferry tokens that were circulated during the siege, but not used to pay the soldiers specifically. Those weren't siege tokens. Those are tokens like emergency money that was made because they had emergency conditions, revalued, whatever, 4A tetradrachms, whatever, stuff like that. But there aren't. And of course, there's always this thought that someone says, have there been any siege money made in America? No, there are no siege coins, particularly siege money. There are money that's circulated during siege. There is reputed to be the Schiller token, which is a Civil War token that's supposed to have been a siege token, but I think more recently, I'm not convinced that it is. I'm not an expert on that, but it seems that Schiller had those tokens, and those things were done prior to and subsequent to the siege, and they circulated during the siege, but were not siege money. So, having touched on the token issue, I could say that siege money is money that was struck, cast, otherwise produced under necessity conditions to pay the troops to defend a town or city under siege, or to finance payments to the soldiers of a besieging army. In either case, this money possessed intrinsic or symbolic value. And if they had intrinsic value, that is, they were made of a valuable metal, those things were valuable to whatever, and you could use them and spend them. If you won the siege, you usually took those, melted them down, and you got the silver because that's all you wanted. If you lost the siege, the coins and tokens or metal and all that other stuff weren't too, well, I can't say they weren't of value to you, but given the cruelty of what happens in the sieges at that time in history, very few people survived. For example, 50,000 people of Harlem were slaughtered. The town of Zutphen, the entire city was slaughtered. And a lot of times then when the opposing army had the upper hand on the ones that slaughtered them in the first time, they exacted their revenge. And so if you lost a siege and you got paid by siege money, a lot of that siege money wasn't worth anything because you weren't around, whether to redeem it intrinsically or to get something symbolically from it. And that's basically it. Siege money is rather fascinating. There's still a whole lot of stuff that needs to be researched. I know I've worked a lot in this book that I have coming out, and I'm hoping that that's a picture of the siege. Oh, I don't have it. I was hoping maybe I should have put a link to the book. I have a first draft, and you could see how it is. But I've already shamelessly promoted that, so I'll shut up right now and accept any questions. I'm yours, Logan.
All right, it doesn't look like we have any questions. I'll give it another second here. If you do have any questions, again, please put them in the chat or the Q&A and I will read them out loud. I'll give it about another 30 seconds or so. And if not, we'll go ahead and wrap up.
Yep.
That was a wonderful presentation, though.
Thanks. Thanks. I just the history and the stuff around this. I got involved in this because I collected German coins
Oh, wow.
many years ago, and I collect German thalers. And a coin dealer in Pittsburgh, who had one of the collections that I talked about with siege money, had
Mm-hmm.
the set of the Davenport books, and he wanted to sell them to me. And in the 1970s, early 70s, I was a school teacher, and $15 a book was a lot of money. But he said, "I'll sell you these books, 45 bucks, 15 a pop, and I'll throw in this coin for you." And it was a real small little siege coin struck, one of those Julick pieces with one of those stamps on it. And I said, "That's fascinating. What is this?" And then I started to read, and that's what got me in it. So I've been doing it for nigh on to 50 some years,
Oh,
picking them
wow.
up. And nobody knew what they were. And frankly, I'll be honest with you, I didn't know much what they were either. But
Yeah.
they're really fascinating, and I do like talking about them.
Yeah. We do have one question. When will your book come out?
When I emailed my publisher, it was supposed to come out for last year's ANA, and then COVID hit. Now everything is behind, and the gentleman working on it, Travis from CNG, said he would get me a proposed date because he's getting the final draft, a proof ready for me. If that proof comes out in a month, I would say by fall at the latest. And knowing how things go, I don't want to say by the ANA. I'm just saying it has to come out in calendar year 2021. I would fully expect it. It should be about 500, 550 or so pages.
Okay.
All the coins, it's titled Obsidian Coins of the World, 1453 to 1902. And what it essentially does is takes all the books that I talked about in the other foreign languages. Some I could translate. I had a friend of mine do the German and the German books, but it takes all of those. So you have a list of all the known siege coins, or all the basically accepted siege coins, and all the cross references to each of those books. So if you have a coin, you can go look and say, aha, here's a number. So in one book, you get one to number 750 or so, 750 different coins, but more varieties than that. But that's what it is. I think it's going to be good. About 550, 600 pages. It looks like it's coming out nice. They're doing a good job. They're making me look good. Trust you. Trust me, they make it look better, and I deserve the look, I think.
Oh, I'm sure that's not true.
Yeah, yeah.
One more question now. Are there any connections to the Knights Templar?
Any connections to the Knights Templars? I've found none. The closest that there's the inference is you see in that Leyden siege medal, where they think it's the hand of God that helped them drive out the Muslims in Jerusalem. No, we don't. I don't know of any of the Knights Templars. You would likely my interest in the Knights Templars lead me to the Merovingian coins in France, and those coins might be, because of the production during the time when the Knights Templar were seated in France, but no siege coins per se that I know of. And if somebody knows, let me know so I can write about it.
All right, perfect. That's all of the questions. Thank you again. That was a great presentation. I know I learned a lot. Very
Thanks.
fascinating. For those of you watching, we do these pretty often. If you check our website, you can register for several different types on different things, and we look forward to you joining us again. Thank you, Lawrence. That was a great job.